Nothing in my previous travels to nearly 40 countries on 6 continents prepared me for what lay behind the ancient walls of Fez el-Bali. Entering the Medina was like stepping back in time. High above the city on a road from the train station, the taxi driver stopped briefly for us to take photos and to get our first view of Morocco's oldest imperial city. A few minutes later, the taxi pulled into a lot crowded with some cars, but mostly with motorcycles. The taxi driver loaded our luggage onto a two-wheeled cart, the type that is usually pulled by a small pack animal. He spoke briefly with a young man, then asked us to wait for a few moments. As we waited, I was struck by the number of microwave towers atop the centuries-old buildings. As I was taking it all in, another young man in a leather jacket approached and asked us to follow him. He then summoned 2 men standing nearby. They took control of the cart, with one pulling and the other pushing. So much for the small pack animals. As they approached small steps along the incline into the Medina, other men helped lift the cart to the next level, then casually continued on their way, as if such assistance is a normal occurrence. A few more turns, and we entered a quiet, narrow, earthy yellow-colored stucco alley. The gentleman in leather rang a bell, and the massive cedar door to Dar Safaran swung open. We were led down a short, narrow passageway that opened into the most magnificent courtyard I have ever seen. In the courtyard, we were warmly welcomed by the Dar staff and offered our first cup of traditional hot, sweet Moroccan mint tea. I felt rather small as I sat in the 4-story central courtyard of the 600-year-old restored mansion. It was elaborately decorated with magnificent tiles and towering carved wood beams. While our room was being prepared, we were given a tour of the Dar, beginning on the rooftop with another fabulous view of the Medina, the oldest part of Fez. The city was founded between the 8th and 9th centuries and is the oldest of Morocco's 3 imperial cities. As we looked out on the densely packed low-rise metropolis, the distinctive green tile minaret of the El Racif Mosque rose high above the rooftops. It was built in the late 18th century and is one of the more than 300 mosques that tower above the Medina's centuries-old building. After our initial aerial introduction to Fez from the Dar's rooftop, our host led us back down the narrow stairway to our suite. It was beautifully appointed in a laid-back style with sturdy Moroccan furnishings, dark ceiling beams, period fixtures, and a modern Western-style bath. Having settled into our suite, we were ready to discover the culture of the Medina, beginning with the food. Our first stop was at Restaurant Safaran, which shares its name with the square where it's located. Safaran Square is a compact, bustling intersection of several streets where copperware craftsmen practice their centuries of craft. They use plenty of elbow grease to form and polish their teapots and trays, kettles, cauldrons, and plates. From the upper level of the restaurant, we absorbed the atmosphere and indulged in our first Moroccan meal, followed by the traditional hot sweet mint tea. After our meal, we went in search of an ATM to get Moroccan dirham, the local currency. Along the way, I took photos of business establishments at each turn, just in case we needed to find our way back. It was sort of like dropping breadcrumbs. As we walked along the narrow streets, we heard someone yell, "Balak! Balak!" as everyone stepped aside, pressing their backs against the wall. We looked back to see a somber gray donkey saddled with rusty orange propane tanks. The pack animal's face was one of indifference and resignation as he moved through the narrow streets toward his destination, with no apparent handler, or at least none that I could see. We would quickly learn that donkeys have the right of way, regardless of how narrow the streets are. They are the primary means to transport goods into and out of the Medina. Many of the streets narrow to about 5 feet and are covered with rough cobblestones, making them too narrow and uneven for any form of motorized transportation. In a city where the buildings are wedged so closely together that they seem to be a single structure, with a multitude of entrances. Donkeys have been, for centuries, the commercial carriers for everything coming into and going out of the Medina. That includes food, clothing, kitchenwares, furnishings, construction material, bottled water, and other items needed by shopkeepers, residents, and tourists. In this city, where the streets are so narrow they blot out nearly all of the Moroccan sky, donkeys will always fill a critical source of transportation, including taking out the daily mounds of garbage. In less than 5 minutes, we entered a large open plaza next to the Air Recif Mosque. We continued through the gate and walked past a street vendor grilling kebabs for the evening meal. A few steps further, we found the ATM. We also saw large delivery trucks that could drive no further into the Medina. We sat in the warm sun of the square and watched the locals walk by in their long hooded jalabas. After just a few minutes, we heard one of the daily calls to prayer. The call came not only from the nearby Air Recif Mosque, but simultaneously from mosques throughout the Medina. We sat for a bit longer, then made our way back to the Dar, where we enjoyed the sunset from the rooftop lounge. The next day, we engaged a local tour guide recommended by our host, then headed out to see some of the sights. The Medina is Fez's oldest tourist attraction. The walled city is nearly 1,000 acres, about the size of New York City's Central Park. It has been continuously inhabited since the 10th century and is the most complete medieval city still in existence. The Fez Medina is one of the most densely populated and largest car-free areas in the world. More than 100,000 people live in the complex maze of streets that make up the Medina. On any given day, the population spikes to more than 300,000. Hordes of tourists like us wander the streets in search of the authentic Morocco. It is believed that over half the Medina's residents are engaged in the artisan trade. Many of the locals have moved to Ville Nouveau, the new city located a few minutes from the Medina. They return to the old city each day to shop, worship, attend classes, or eat. Fez el-Bali is surrounded by more than 9 miles of walls with 14 gates. Some of the 9,300 streets are so narrow that it is a challenge for 2 grown men to walk shoulder to shoulder. Our first stop with the guide was Seferin Square, where we'd eaten the previous day. We poked our heads into the 14th century Carowan Library, once used by the country's most learned men. Although it's closed to the public, I was able to take pictures of both sets of steps leading to the upper level. One was blue for the color of Fez, the other was green for the color of Islam. As we turned down another narrow street, I detected a noxious odor that told me we were headed to the famous tanneries of Fez. Our guide gave us a sprig of fresh mint to hold under our nose to counterbalance the strong odor from the tanning solution. However, as soon as I entered the tanneries, I was too fascinated with the process to notice. The tanneries of Fez are the oldest in the world, dating back to medieval times, and little about the process has changed. Hides of sheep, goats, cows, camels go through various stages of tanning that turn them into soft, long-lasting leather. From the second-level terrace above the tanning honeycomb of stone vat, we could see all steps in the process. The hides are brought in by donkey, hair and flesh are removed. They are then soaked up to 6 days in a mixture of acidic pigeon excrement to soften them. Yes, pigeon poop is the key to the softness of Moroccan leather. The hides are then dyed using henna, saffron, or mint vegetable dyes, and laid on the rooftop in the sun to dry. The final step is to turn the hides into shoes, coats, handbags, slippers, belts, and other products for locals and tourists. The royal palace in New Fez was built in the 13th century and is still used by the current Moroccan king when he visits Fez. The capital was moved to Rabat in 1912. The palace has 7 bronze doors. The doors are sealed, except when the king visits. Each door is fitted with huge ornate bronze knockers. The geometric design on the doors was created by expert craftsmen using only a hammer and chisel. Above each door is an arc of blue and green Zilic mosaic tiles. The Mellah, or Jewish quarters, near the royal palace, was the first Jewish enclave in Fez. Established in the early 15th century, the Mellah was a walled community to protect the Jews from the violence of the surrounding Arabic community. The area's 15th century architecture can be seen in the wrought iron latticework and balconies facing the street. Traditional Muslim homes, on the other hand, only have balconies on the interior courtyard. Despite the architecture, today the former Jewish town is nearly all Muslim. As we headed back into the Medina, we passed vendors selling spices, dried dates, dyed threads, produce, and, of course, fresh mint. Some of the vendor stalls in the Medina are so small that there is no space for a door. Notice the rope suspended from the beam above the counter of this vendor's stall? To get behind the counter, I saw the young man grab the rope and swing himself up and over the display case. Once on the other side, there's barely room for him to move around. No tour of Fez el-Bali is complete without a tour of a carpet shop. On the upper floor, 3 young girls worked at a feverish pace to demonstrate how they create a carpet. All carpets in the shop were handmade. Most of them were made by Berber women who incorporate the work into their daily routine as a homemaker. Construction of this mosque began in the 9th century. Over the next 12 centuries, it grew into a major university and mosque. Today, it is one of the largest mosques in northern Africa, with space for 20,000 worshippers. It is recognized as the oldest continuously open university in the world. In this scene, a worshipper performed the act of ablution, or washing himself before the prayer. Like many mosques in this Muslim country, non-Muslims were barred from entry. These photos were taken when one of the doorkeepers took my camera inside and snapped a few photographs in exchange for a small donation. The 17th century Nezherin fountain is one of the city's most beautiful uses of Zelig tile. Zelig is an Islamic art form that is based on learning, discipline, and faith. The geometric patterns reflect the Islamic belief that life is ordered by cosmic intelligence, even if people can't always understand it. Each Zelig tile is individually shaped and hand-cut. Although the art form is most prevalent in Fez, Zelig tiles can be found throughout Morocco and the Middle East. This madrasa has been educating Muslim boys for the best part of 700 years. No surface of the elaborately decorated 14th century madrasa was left undecorated. Doorways, halls, and ceilings at this residential college are all carved in splendid dark cedar wood and stucco, lacy, fleur-de-lis patterns. It is still a working mosque and thought to be the only one in Fez open to non-Muslims. This is the main gate into the city, one of the ancient city's 14 gates. Built in 1913, the gate is elaborately tiled on the Medina side with green tiles, the color of Islam. The facade leading into the city is covered with blue tiles, the color of Fez. During the tour, our guide said that many of the Medina shopkeepers live in Ville Nouveau, the city's modern business and commercial center. So I was anxious to see how the rest of the Fezis lived. Although less than a 15-minute taxi ride from Fez el-Bali, the two centers are literally worlds apart. Ville Nouveau was built by the French in the 19th and 20th centuries and has wide Paris-style boulevards, high-rise office buildings, European-style hotels, traffic circles, and sidewalk cafes. Running through the center of Ville Nouveau is Avenue Hassan II, a wide boulevard with the central pedestrian island. Tall Moroccan palms grace both sides of the island. 2 larger-than-life bronze lions are flanked by benches. These benches and the street-side seating at the restaurants and cafes provide an ideal place to contemplate the contrast between this modern city and its ancient counterpart just a few minutes away. The magnificent fountain at Plaza de la Resistencia at the northern end of Avenue Hassan II is a prominent landmark, a popular tourist attraction, and a common taxi drop-off point. A few steps away, I saw an iconic American symbol, a McDonald's restaurant, where there was a kid's birthday party underway. The few sights that I saw in Ville Nouveau certainly showed the two faces of Fez, but on my last full day in the city, it was time to make my way back to the old Medina. We enjoyed one more Moroccan sunset from the Dar Safarin rooftop, one more authentic Moroccan meal, and a good night's sleep. Bright and early the next morning, we bid farewell to Fez el-Bali, an ancient city that has stubbornly preserved its lifestyle, skills, and culture despite the onslaught of modern-day intrusion.